everybody, welcome to Gardening TLC. My name is Michelle and I live in Northern Illinois, Zone 5. How many of you have been trying to achieve that layered look in the garden, but you're struggling with it? You see other people do it, you see it in magazines, but you're like, how do I get that look in the garden? How do I achieve that? For me, that was one of the hardest concepts to get right, and I think that it takes some practice to do it, but let's start with some of the beginning steps of what you even need to think about to create that layering in the garden. Hopefully today's video will address some of those for you, get your brain thinking about it so that you can create it in your garden too. So come on, let's go. So you want to create some layers in the garden. Well, think about nature. Nature, the plants grow in clusters, they grow in drifts, they interlock. Think about walking through the woods and how you see the different patterns and textures and different plants layered in the forest. Well, that's what you're trying to create in your garden. Now, one of the things that's going to help you create layers is by creating what we call patterns. The patterns are not just one-dimensional though. They're actually two-dimensional. So we're going to have you think about it maybe a little differently than you have in the past. When you want to create layering, you want to think about the vertical part of that layering, but you also want to think about the horizontal part of that layering as well, because the two of them together are what's going to create that layering in the garden that you're looking for. The next thing you have to do is you have to wrap your mind around the fact that a 4-foot bed is not wide enough to do layering in. You have to have wider beds to create that depth that you're looking for. So whether your bed is up against the house or it goes out from the house or it's an island or whatever it is you're going to layer, you're going to have enough room to create that horizontal spread that you're going to need. I have some really good examples of layering that I'll show you later in the video. I actually did some clips of them when I saw them on the garden walk that I went on in Rockford. I have a few examples here at my own house that show some of the different layers, but let's go through the basic concepts of what you need to start thinking about if you want to layer, because maybe this will help you kind of get the order of how it needs to go in your brain. All right, there was no way I was going in the office and shooting this video. I have to be outside. It is really beautiful out here. And I don't know about you guys. I'm a visual person. Yeah. Back to school, I got my dry erase board out and I'm like, all right, I'm going to draw you guys some pictures so that you can wrap your brain around what I'm talking about. The first part that we're going to talk about will be the vertical layers. This will be the first thing I want you to wrap your brain around so that you can understand how to create the layers going up. The first layer that we're going to start with is the bottom layer, or what we call the ground layer. The ground layer are the plants that are on the ground. They're 6 inches or less. They can include turf or even ground cover, but they're covering the soil at the very bottom of the vertical height. The next layer up is going to be your foreground layer, and these are plants that are 6 inches to 2 feet. They represent the next vertical change from the ground. So you basically want small masses of the lowest of these plants to form the edge of the plant beds and to serve as a transition to the larger plants. So this next layer right here is between 2 and 5 feet. This is what we call the mid-ground layer. So these plants take up most of the space in the whole area, and they serve a lot of functions. They are going to create the bridge between this piece and the taller piece, or maybe the taller piece is a building, but it's where you're going to create a lot of the texture right there in this piece. The last layer vertically is going to be your background. This is anything that's above 5 feet. It's your large trees, it's your big shrubs, it's the stuff in the background. Now the background doesn't necessarily have to be in the bed that you're creating. It can be further away. The biggest thing to remember though, if you're going to use things that are further away to create that backdrop look, you don't want to skip this mid-level right here and have big gaps between the foreground and the background. This is what's going to visually tie it all together if this is further away. So you want to make sure that you're covering all 4 layers in this vertical grouping going up and down. So now we're going to talk about how do I create the depth or the horizontal look in the bed. What do I mean by horizontal? Well, that would be the depth of the bed. So again, the tallest is in the back, the shortest is in the front. So think of this as an overhead view that you're looking at. The background or the tallest layer is usually located along a fence, a wall, a property line. So it's usually best to locate this one first and then visually work forward from there. So you have the same layers. You still have your ground layer, your foreground, your midground, and your background. You're just looking at this from an overhead perspective versus a straight on perspective. The lower plants are still here. These are still your turf, your ground covers, your really short perennials, anything under 6 inches. Then you've got your foreground. The foreground are usually perennials, smaller shrubs, something that's between 6 and 24 inches. Now it might be a little bit taller than that, but that's pretty much the range. Then you've got your foreground here. Again, the foreground are going to be larger shrubs, larger perennials. They're going to fall between 2 feet and 5 feet, and then anything over 5 feet goes in the background. Most plant compositions are viewed from one of 2 vantage points, where the ground layer and the foreground plants are the closest to you, and then the midground and the background are the furthest away. Now, composition is more interesting, however, if you kind of take a few of the taller plants and intermingle them with some of the shorter plants to kind of bring it forward and back. So add a few tall plants to the foreground or the midground layer. It is definitely helpful when you're laying out the garden bed itself that you put your cans in place. That way you can visually see how you grouped them. And we're going to talk about grouping plants in just a minute and how you can be more effective in that layering technique just from how you group your plants. Now, you might look at this and go, there's 4 layers in that. That must be a really deep bed. But remember, there's 2 vantage points. The vantage point could be how I'm looking right on it, but the other vantage point could be when I'm looking from a distance. And then the layers might not all be in one bed. This bed here might only be 2 layers. It might be the grass, and then the 2 layers of perennials and shrubs, and this background might be trees that are far away that are creating that, or buildings, something that's creating that for you. So it doesn't have to be crazy deep, it just has to be deep enough that you can layer. I'm telling you, pulling a few plants forward though can really make a difference visually when you're looking at it. The next thing I really want you to think about is how you mass those plants within the layers. So within the layers, the individual plants are grouped together in clusters, and you want them to connect to each other. You want them to overlap a little bit. You want them to intermingle. So how you actually put the cans in there before you plant them can make a difference. Not all plants are designed to be grouped together, so just know that. And if you're not sure which ones look good together, look on the internet, watch a video, go to Pinterest. You'll see all kinds of examples of what looks good together. Other plants, they're specimen plants. All by themselves. They can carry the show. They look good. For the purpose of this section that we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about those perennials or things that you can group together in mass. So what we want to do is cluster individual plants together, and we want to put them close enough that they touch when they're fully mature. Yes, they're clustered together, but no, they don't touch, and they won't look good because there's too much of a gap in between. You want to overlap the masses of the plants so that they have maximum interface. All right, so when you plant them, you want them to touch like that. Vary the shape of the masses. Some should be long and narrow, some short and wide, some curved, but you want it to be organic, not geometric. You want it to be like what nature does. Other things you can do is varying the size of the masses. So you might have a large one, put it together with a couple of smaller ones. Use different size plants as well when you're grouping them together. So remember, everything in your bed isn't going to be perennials, and the size of your plant doesn't dictate how big the area is or the masses that you're going to put in. You can use a couple of bigger shrubs and create a smaller mass. On the other hand, you can use a whole bunch of the same perennial and create a larger mass. So depending on the form and the texture of what it is that you're using, this approach actually helps display the plants a little bit better. So real fast, I'm just going to show you how you can create layering in the garden. So if we start at the very back with the background, I am using these trees as my background. Now, I don't have anything right here because this is lawn, but I did the layering right here as I come up to my back porch. So my bottom layer, if I come forward, it's actually the deck with some lamium as a ground cover. Then I've got my plants that are between 6 and 24 inches, and those are the hostas. That is my foreground. My midground is going to be this lemony lace elderberry, and then behind that lemony lace elderberry, I have another one that is going to be the black lace elderberry to fill the gap between the background and this base ground down here. The last thing to think about when you're doing layering in the garden is repeating patterns in the garden. So you can do that 3 different ways. You can repeat a pattern by repeating the colors in the bed. So strategically placing those in the bed to draw your line down the bed. You can also do this by repeating forms. Forms are going to be the shapes of the plants that are in your bed. Things that have a more vertical shape, like a juniper, an arborvitae, those are going to carry heavier weight in the bed than, say, something that's small and round. So when you're using forms to repeat pattern, remember, the bigger it is, the less of them you want to use. When you're using form to repeat a pattern in the garden, what you're doing is repeating that form throughout the garden so that it draws your eye. So that's another way to draw your eye, either through the bed or down the bed. And then the last way is with texture. Texture is that visual weight that we give something. Think about a lamb's ear. It's soft and it's fuzzy. Now think of a juniper. It's a little more prickly. So that is the texture. You have fine texture, medium texture, and coarse texture. Typically, if you're using a coarse textured plant, you're going to use less of them. And if you're using a really fine textured plant, you're using more of them. You can overdo it with too much clutter together. So make sure that it's pleasing to the eye when you're using this and repeating it in the garden bed. The other thing is, if you're going to use like a coarse textured plant in the background, put fine textures things in front of it, and that'll make it stand out more. And the reverse is true as well. If you put that coarser texture in the front and the finer texture in the back, use a little bit more of that. One will make the other stand out. Also note that color can affect the perception of texture. Bold colors tend to look coarser, whereas muted colors or pastels, they seem to have like a finer perception to that texture. The other thing you can do too is, if you're trying to create unity in the garden, just use one texture throughout the whole course of the garden to create unity. All right, maybe you've been trying to create layering at your house and you just can't quite get it, or you're not quite sure what's missing. Go back, watch this video. What are the steps that I talked about? Okay, let's go back to the very basics. Here's an area that I have in my garden where I missed one of the vertical layers. So I have the background, that's the big pine trees right here. I have the ground layer, which is right here. It's the sand, it's the grass, that's between the bed and the pine trees. I have the foreground, which is right here. What's missing? The middle ground. I do have this one tree right here in the middle ground, that tulip tree, but I have nothing right here bridging the gap between the two. So I have a big gap right there, which interferes with creating that layer. So if I really truly want to have this layered, I need to cut in another 6 feet behind the bed, and I need to create a layer either behind this bed or in front of the pine trees to bridge the gap between the two. And then I will truly have layers coming down. So when I went on the garden walk, I saw some different layering that I thought I'd share with you. So let's take a look at those now. This is an excellent example of layering and repeating patterns throughout an area to create that cohesiveness that you're looking for. So the pine is actually the repeated pattern. They've used all 4 of the colors in here, from yellow, green, blue, and red, even though the red's a little bit of a purple. I'm telling you, this is so beautiful. I love the layering. Get a little bit closer and take a look up here where we've got some natural stone, and that natural stone, they have used it in the front of this with a water feature behind it. But look at how they layered that bird's nest spruce with the blue juniper and then that Cotonou aster, and then they just tucked a little hosta in there. How awesome is this? You've got that white pine just draping over the top, and then the whole thing culminates right back here with the St. John's wort behind it and the water feature. Here's a good example of all the layering in one bed. You've got the background, which has got those beautiful weeping white spruce, and then you've got that crabapple tree, which isn't even full grown yet. So that canopy is going to spread out wider, and that's going to be your background layer. Your midground is your hydrangeas, that ivory halo dogwood, and then some of those purple woodgilias that are in there. Come down a little bit lower to the foreground. We've got some spireas. We've got those Dobbs frosted junipers, and then some of those little Norway spruces in the front. Come all the way forward, which you can't really see in this picture, but ground level is the edge of the bed, which was the turf right at the edge of the bed. So a great example of 4 different layers all in one bed. Plus, check out the colors: blue, red, green, yellow. They are all there. And look at the texture. We've got some strong, coarse texture in those white spruce, and then we've got some finer texture when you come lower into some of the Norway spruces, the spireas. Actually, yeah, they are spireas, or are they a stilby? I think they're one or the other. I can't tell from this picture. Just a great example of layering in the garden. This layering is in the exact same garden that we were just at. It's probably about 300 yards away. I could have stood and just looked at this one all afternoon long. It was so visually striking. This would be one that I would actually try to replicate in my own garden. So when you talk about form, look at those arbovitas in there and that strong form that it gives you. And then look at all the round forms in there and how they repeated themselves. And again, they have all the colors: blue, red, green, yellow. That makes it so cohesive and makes it come together. We have all 4 layers and we have the depth. So when you look at what we just talked about, as far as everything that you need to layer a garden and make it look good, this one checks about every single box that I talked about. Absolutely fabulous. The day of the garden walk, I also recorded this little area besides just taking a picture of my thoughts about the layering. So let's hear what I had to say. This whole garden is a study in layering. It's probably the best layering I've seen in a really long time. This garden has taken years to establish, though. This isn't something that you achieve overnight. It takes time to create those layers and have them grow and fill in and create the depth that this garden has. So as you can see here, we've got 2 different kinds of arborvitae that are creating some height in the back with some beautiful green. Over to the left, we have a quick fire hydrangea, drop down to a darker glossy green, totally different shape on the leaves with that holly. And then look at the play on the hostas and how one just plays right into another, from blue to kind of a chartreuse green to a green white, and then back around again to a green with an inside marking that's yellow. Just absolutely stunning. All right, here is another good example in this garden of layering. Again, I just love it when things come together, whether it's planned or it just kind of happened. But look at the beautiful blue spruce in the background. Then you drop down to the next layer, which is this beautiful Japanese grass, followed by the green blue of the hosta. Then you've got the white Minuteman, dropping all the way to a Norwegian little spruce down here on the ground, back up to a spirea. And then look, you kind of repeat the color here with this ivory halo dogwood. But even this textured layering with the green here and the ligularia, which is done, but it had yellow flowers on it, all of that in the palette just plays this beautiful layering all the way down. And then just throw a lantern in there just because it looks cool. Layering doesn't have to be big and dramatic either. This is actually 3 plants creating a layer in the garden where your backdrop is actually the brick wall. Adding elements into the layering can also give you the effect that you're looking for. In this case, she has a pot in there that she's planted the white begonias in. Our mid layer is going to be those beautiful monardas, and then the bottom layer with that beautiful soft texture of the lamb's ear. Isn't it so cool how she just created that nice layer with the different textures? So it doesn't have to be complicated. You can create layering within the garden in just a small area and have the same effect. Another great example of layering in the shade, we have a beautiful Everlow yew back here, followed by iris here. Now they do get a peak of sun that comes through here, probably enough for these iris to bloom, but look at that strappy texture. And that's what I like about the layering of this bed. We have all these different colors of green and all of the different textures all blended together. So we have just a plain green hosta, and then next to that, look at that beautiful Brunnera, and then, oh, here's one you don't see every day. That's also a Brunnera, but it's just a variegated one. Absolutely gorgeous. Great example of layering. Here's a great little pocket garden, and even though it's not very big, it's layered very well. We start with the sunflower that we've got on the shed here, come over to an oak leaf hydrangea that drops down into this, I'm not quite sure what it is, but it's beautiful. But it makes me think of a sun king. I don't think that's what it is. And I don't think it's a hydrangea, but I love the color. But then we drop down to some astilbes. We got this beautiful blue hosta over here, followed by the big leaf one here. And I don't know the names of all of these hostas, but oh my gosh, we got a bug bane or a synchrofuga back here that will get bigger, and it gets the big, long, licorice smelling flowers on it. And look at it, it just drops down right into this beautiful heuchera, a Minuteman pasta, and then you've got that Japanese forest grass, the Hakanakloa, that's the areola. Absolutely gorgeous. All right, you guys, that's all I've got for today. I hope this was helpful, and I hope maybe it makes your brain think a little bit about how can I create that layered look in the garden if this is something that you've been trying to achieve, but you just can't quite hit it, or maybe you're just missing one little piece and you need to take some of the things that we talked about today, go out, stand in front of your garden bed, and just look at it and see what's missing. Go through the steps and you'll be able to figure it out. And probably it's something little, or if it's something that you're starting from scratch, this will give you the steps to get going. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. If you have not subscribed, please do so. Like, share with your friends, leave your comments and questions below. Don't forget, Garden Gab is the first Saturday of the month. That is coming up very quickly here, so make sure you stay tuned for that. We are having a live Garden Gab on Saturday, August 17th at 10 a.m. Make sure you set your calendars for that. It'll be our first one. It'll either be totally awesome or it'll be a total flop. We'll find out together. And if you want to send a picture in for us to showcase during Garden Gab, which is the first Saturday of the month, that's the one where I show these, tell me who you are, what we're looking at, where you live, and what zone it is. Send me a picture in a landscape format to this email address right here, and that address is always down in the description. I would love to share your beautiful garden with all of our viewers. The other thing is, I am getting ready to do some viewer tour gardens, and that means I'm going to go to some viewers and tour their gardens, and we're going to be showing it on my channel. So if this is something that you'd be interested in having me come and do, drop me a line down below or an email. Now, I'm not going to fly to California, you guys, or Germany. Right now, I'm going to start in Illinois and Wisconsin, maybe Iowa, Indiana, because I'm kind of like in that 4-state area where I could get there very quickly. So if that's something that you'd like to do, I would love to come and showcase somebody's garden and have that be part of my channel, because you know what? You want to be inspired? Go visit somebody else's garden. So I'm Michelle. Thank you so much for watching. Go out in your garden today. Give it a little TLC because it deserves it, and so do you. Bye, everybody. See you in the next video.